The digital sign blinked its final message: "No more service tonight. Happy New Year." She checked her phone. 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until midnight, and she was stranded 15 miles from home. Behind her, the city sparkled with celebration. Fireworks would start soon. People were laughing, toasting, counting down to new beginnings. Margaret pulled her coat tighter and tried not to cry. She was 62 years old, and this was not how she'd imagined spending New Year's Eve. The hospice shift had run late. Mrs. Patterson had needed someone to sit with her as the year ended, and Margaret couldn't say number. She'd held the elderly woman's hand, listening to stories about New Year's Eves from decades past, watching the light in her patient's eyes grow dimmer. Margaret had been a hospice nurse for 30 years. She knew this job, knew how to be present for people in their final days, how to offer comfort when there was nothing else to give. But it never got easier. And somewhere between monitoring medications and holding Mrs. Patterson's hand, she'd lost track of time, lost track of the buses, lost track of everything except being there for someone who needed her. Now here she stood, alone at a bus stop, too far from home to walk, too proud to call her daughter on New Year's Eve and admit she'd gotten stranded. Sarah had her own life now, her own family. She didn't need her mother calling in the middle of her celebration because she'd made a mistake. Margaret sat down on the bench and closed her eyes. "Excuse me, Mom?" She looked up to see a man standing a few feet away. He was maybe 50, with kind eyes and a worn jacket. A young boy, perhaps 9 or 10, stood beside him, holding his hand. "I'm sorry to bother you," the man said gently, "but I couldn't help noticing." "Are you all right?" Margaret straightened, embarrassed. "Oh, yes, I'm fine. I just missed my bus." The boy tugged his father's sleeve. "Dad, it's almost midnight. Nobody should be alone on New Year's Eve." The man, his name agreed. Davida smiled at his son, then looked back at Margaret. "My boy's right. Can we offer you a ride somewhere? We're heading home after my shift at the warehouse, but we'd be happy to take you where you need to go." Margaret hesitated. She'd been taught never to accept rides from strangers. But there was something about this man's face, something honest and tired and kind. And the boy beside him had such earnest eyes. "I don't want to impose," she said carefully, "especially on New Year's Eve." David shrugged. "It's just another night for us. My wife passed away 3 years ago. We usually work through the holidays, then go home and make hot chocolate. A detour won't hurt." The boy nodded vigorously. "And Dad says helping people is the best way to start a new year." Something in Margaret's chest loosened. "If you're sure," she said quietly. "I live in Riverside. It's about 15 miles. We know where it is," David said with a smile. "Come on, our truck's just over here." The truck was old but clean, with a booster seat in the back for the boy. Margaret climbed into the passenger seat, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. As David pulled onto the highway, the boy, his name was Ethan, she learned, chattered from the back seat. "Dad and I always work on holidays," he explained. "Dad says it's when people need extra help the most. We worked on Christmas too, but that's okay because we had Christmas the next day instead. Ethan volunteers with me sometimes," David added, glancing at his son in the rear-view mirror. "The warehouse manager doesn't mind if he comes along on overnight shifts when school's out. Better than leaving him home alone." "I help sort packages," Ethan said proudly. "I'm really good at it." Margaret listened to this child talk about working overnight shifts on holidays with his father, and her heart ached. "Where's your family tonight?" Ethan asked suddenly. "Don't you have anyone to celebrate with, Ethan?" David said gently. "That's personal." "It's all right," Margaret said. She was quiet for a moment, watching the dark highway roll past. "I have a daughter, Sarah. She's 40 now, with a family of her own, a husband, 2 children. They're probably watching fireworks right now." "Why aren't you with them?" Ethan asked. It was such a simple question, the kind only a child would ask. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "I was working. I'm a nurse, a hospice nurse. I sit with people who are dying, and I help make sure their last days are comfortable." "That's important work," David said softly. "It is, Margaret agreed. But it means I miss things sometimes. Holidays, birthdays, family gatherings. And over the years, I guess I missed so many that my daughter stopped expecting me to be there. Her voice cracked. She invited me tonight to dinner with her family, but I told her I had to work, and she just said okay, Mom, in that voice that means she's not surprised anymore. Not disappointed, just resigned. The tears came then, silent and hot. I've spent 30 years taking care of other people, she whispered, making sure they don't die alone, making sure they have someone holding their hand at the end. And somehow I forgot to hold on to my own daughter's hand along the way. David didn't say anything for a long moment. He just drove, steady and sure. Then, quietly, he spoke. My wife Anna was a teacher, he said. She loved those kids like they were her own. Stayed late every day, came in on weekends, spent her own money on supplies. She changed lives. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. And 3 years ago, she collapsed in her classroom from a brain aneurysm. Gone in an instant. All those kids she'd helped, all those lives she'd touched. But she never got to see Ethan graduate from elementary school. Never got to see him grow up. Margaret looked at him, seeing the grief still fresh in his eyes. I was angry at first, David continued. Angry that she'd given so much to everyone else. But then I realized, that was who she was. That's what made her Anna. And all that love she gave, it didn't disappear. It's still out there, in every kid she taught, every life she changed. He glanced at Margaret. Your daughter knows you love her. She knows why you do what you do. And maybe she's resigned because she's learned to be proud of you instead of hurt by your absence. Or maybe, Ethan piped up from the back seat, maybe she just wants to see you more. My mom used to work a lot too, and I was sad sometimes. But I was never mad. I just missed her. Margaret closed her eyes. Out of the mouths of babes. When they pulled up to her house 20 minutes later, Margaret saw lights on inside. Her heart skipped. That's strange, she murmured. I wasn't expecting. The front door opened, and Sarah appeared on the porch. Behind her, Margaret could see her son-in-law and the grandchildren, all in pajamas. Sarah hurried down the walk, her face a mixture of relief and worry. Mom, we've been calling you for an hour. When you didn't answer, we packed up and came here. We were so worried. She stopped, seeing the truck, seeing David and Ethan. Margaret climbed out slowly. I'm sorry, sweetheart. My phone died, and I missed the bus, and these kind people gave me a ride home. Sarah looked at David, then at her mother, and suddenly she was crying. I thought something had happened to you, she whispered, pulling Margaret into a fierce hug. I thought I'd lost you, and the last thing I'd said to you was just okay, Mom, like it didn't matter that you were missing New Year's Eve again. Margaret held her daughter tight. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for all the times I wasn't there. I'm sorry for her. No, Sarah said firmly, pulling back to look at her. No apologies. I know why you do what you do. I've always known. I just miss you sometimes. Margaret started to cry then, really cry, and Sarah held her like she was a child again. Behind them, David cleared his throat gently. We should go. Let you have your evening. Wait, Sarah said, wiping her eyes. She looked at David and Ethan. It's almost midnight. Please, come inside. Have some hot chocolate with us. It's the least we can do. David hesitated. We couldn't impose. You brought my mother home safely on New Year's Eve, Sarah said. You gave her a ride when she needed help. Please, let us thank you properly. Ethan tugged his father's hand. Can we, Dad? They have grandkids. Maybe they have games. David looked at Margaret, a question in his eyes. She smiled through her tears. Please, join us. They gathered in Margaret's living room as the countdown began on television. The grandchildren immediately pulled Ethan into their orbit, showing him their new toys. David and Margaret's son-in-law talked quietly about work and life and the strange beauty of found moments. And Margaret sat beside her daughter on the couch, their hands clasped together, as the final seconds of the year ticked away. 10, 9, 8. Sarah leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. I love you, Mom, she whispered. Thank you for spending your life helping people. Thank you for being who you are. 7, 6, 5. Margaret squeezed her daughter's hand. I love you too, sweetheart, and I promise to be here more, not just in body, but in heart. 4, 3, 2. David caught Margaret's eye across the room and smiled. A smile that said, see, your love didn't go unnoticed. 1. Happy New Year. Fireworks exploded outside. The children cheered. Sarah hugged her mother close, and Margaret realized that sometimes the best moments come not from perfect planning, but from missing the last bus and trusting a stranger's kindness. From being vulnerable enough to admit you're lost, and humble enough to accept help when it's offered. From understanding that love takes many forms, the love of a nurse for her patients, the love of a father for his son, the love of a daughter who just wants her mother home. Later, after David and Ethan had left with promises to stay in touch, after the grandchildren had fallen asleep, Sarah made tea and sat with her mother at the kitchen table. That man, Sarah said softly. David. He seems nice. Margaret smiled. He is. He and his son work holidays so others don't have to. They understand what it means to serve. Kind of like you, Sarah observed. Yes, Margaret agreed. I suppose so. They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their tea, listening to the distant sound of fireworks. Happy New Year, Mom, Sarah finally said. Margaret reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. Happy New Year, sweetheart. Thank you for waiting for me. Always, Sarah said simply. Always. And in that quiet kitchen, with the new year just begun, Margaret understood that she hadn't missed what mattered after all. She was right where she belonged, home. The end.